So welcome everyone to the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice, Path to COP30 and Beyond. My name is Osprey Oriel Lake, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN, and I'm living here on Coast Miwok lands in the San Francisco Bay Area in California. And as we open this gathering, we want to continue to invite people to introduce yourself in the chat with your name and where you're from. It's just been so thrilling every day to have people literally from all over the world joining us and participating in the chat and contributing with your presence and your knowledge and good conversation and questions in the chat. So thank you. For those of you participating through various live streams, we welcome you from far and wide. And if you would like to hear all of the sessions in your preferred language and also participate in the lively live chat, please be welcome to join us on Zoom. The registration link is on our website and across our social media channels. And we're very excited to learn that so far there have been over 100,000 people tuning in and viewing the assembly across the live streams in Zoom. So it's really wonderful. With that, I also want to just take a moment, as we've been doing every day, to acknowledge this very challenging time and welcome you all to a space for us to be together, to connect together, to be in community. Please know that WECAN is here for you and that you are not alone and that we send you our love and well-being. It's so important at these times to be connected in community, and this is what this space is for. This global assembly is taking place during the second week of the climate talks in Bonn, Germany, where the continued struggle by our movements is underway, challenging governments to fight for climate justice, to end fossil fuels, to keep the 1.5 degree guardrail, centering gender in the UNFCCC negotiations, climate finance, the just transition, and so much more. Our assembly is timed to create a bridge with the vital advocacy work at the UNFCCC. Before our first panel of the day, I want to remind everyone that as part of this assembly, we're releasing a powerful call to action to governments and financial institutions globally, because we want them to hear from us. The collectively written call to action will be delivered at the UN General Assembly in September and at COP30 in November. And you can see the call to action with our demands in the chat. And there is still time to sign the document and to take action with us. So we welcome organizational sign-ons, and thank you for everyone who already has. It's been wonderful to see how many more organizations have signed us through the process of this assembly. And last announcement for now is that WECAN is also soft launching a WhatsApp networking platform so that the conversations generated at this assembly can carry on into action going forward. The WhatsApp group is a place where you can connect with each other and share your climate justice related work, your research, projects, campaigns, and find collaboration partners. So we're putting a link to that in the chat, and we continue to welcome people to join us. So we're going to start our first panel. I want to welcome this incredible group of leaders to our first panel of the day, Wellbeing Economies for People and Planet. And I want to thank all of the presenters for your important work and leadership. Over the last few days in this assembly, we've been really talking about how much our current economy is so detrimental to life, to put it in very simple terms. We've been naming clear truths that the climate crisis is not just an environmental issue, it's a justice issue. It's a crisis born of systemic injustice, fueled by centuries of colonialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and extractive capitalism. These systems are not abstract. They show up in our economies every day. They devalue life, care, and community, and they especially devalue the labor, leadership, and wisdom of women, particularly Indigenous, Black, and women of color, whose care work sustains not only our households and communities, but the planet itself. So just to be clear, care work is climate work, even though it doesn't get recognized. If we are serious about building a regenerative, just, and livable future, we really need to center a feminist, care-based economy, one grounded in gender justice, racial justice, and ecological integrity. Investing in a care economy is not a side issue. It is central to achieving a just transition. It means supporting clean energy, decarbonization, community health, and the rights and well-being of workers, especially those long pushed to the margins. We invite you to dive into WECAN's report, how prioritizing care work can unlock a just transition for all, and we're going to put a link to that report in the chat. It offers a vision backed by data that valuing care and investing in care jobs builds resilient economies while confronting the root causes of climate breakdown. And all over the world, women are calling for a different way forward, grounded in circular economies, earth-centered values, and indigenous frameworks like Buen Vivir, which teaches us to live in harmony with each other and the natural world. This is the kind of leadership we need, bold, relational, rooted in justice and love for future generations. Reimagining our economies requires us to listen to those who have long stewarded the earth. It means unlearning the extractive logic of taking, exploiting, and dominating, instead of embracing a regenerative approach that honors reciprocity, care, and interdependence. And we can look to economic models that are already there that so many people have been developing, from degrowth to Samak Kausai, the well-being economy, Bhutan's Gross National Happiness Index, and others to help us and lead the way. And with that, I'm really honored to turn to our speakers, each of whom brings expertise and visionary leadership to this conversation. We'll be hearing from Dr. Jemilah Mahmood, who is the Executive Director of Sunway Center for Planetary Health from Malaysia. Then we'll be hearing from Memory Kachambwa, who is the Executive Director of African Women's Development and Communication Network, FEMNET, in Kenya. Then we'll be hearing from Majo Cerda, who is Kichwa. She's a member of the Council of CONFENIAE, leader of the Economy and Community Development Area, member of the Kichwa Peoples of Serena, and Federation of Napo Indigenous Organizations from Ecuador. We'll be hearing from Dr. Maliha Khan, President and Chief Executive Officer from Women Deliver from Pakistan. And we'll be hearing from Rauna Kuokkanen, who is Sápmi. She's a research professor of Arctic Indigenous Studies at the University of Lapland in Finland. And then finally, we'll be hearing from Sandrine Dixson-Declève. She's an honorary president of the Club of Rome and executive chair of Earth for All from Belgium. So this is quite an extraordinary group of leaders that will be taking us through this important topic. And with that, I'm very honored to hand the floor over to Dr. Jemilah Mahmood. You have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Osprey. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever in the world you may be. It's really an honor for me to be with all of you today, among fierce and fearless women leaders, frontline defenders, thinkers, and doers, each of us bound by a deep commitment to reimagine a world where both people and planet not only survive, but thrive. We gather at a moment of unprecedented challenge. That Earth is burning, inequality is deepening, democracy is fraying. We are living through what many now call a polycrisis, a term that hardly captures the grief and exhaustion so many feel. But even in this storm, we are not powerless. As Arundhati Roy once said, another world is only possible. She is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Today, I believe that breath grows louder because we are breathing life into the future together. At the heart of this gathering is a simple but radical idea that well-being, not profit, should be the measure of progress, that we must stop sacrificing people and the planet on the altar of limitless economic growth, and that care, community, and connection are not just moral values, they are economic strategies. One framework guiding this shift is donut economics, developed by Kate Raworth. It invites us to ask, how do we ensure no one falls short on the essentials of life? like food, health, education, and political voice, while also staying within our planet's ecological boundaries. It's about thriving in the safe space between deprivation and ecological collapse. This is not an academic theory, it's a living practice. And I'm proud to say it's taking root in my own country, Malaysia. In a city called Ipoh, rich in natural and cultural heritage, the donut model is becoming reality. In partnership with the City Council and local think tanks, our team at the Planetary Health Center of Sunway are creating a new kind of economy, one that heals rather than harms. We are focusing on regenerative ecotourism that empowers local communities, especially women and Indigenous people, to protect biodiversity while earning dignified incomes. Limestone casts carbon sequestration, turning nature-based solutions into sustainable revenue streams. Community-based disaster preparedness, helping families build resilience against floods and waterborne diseases intensified by climate change. Critically, this isn't a top-down project. It was embedded into the state's development blueprint after inclusive, high-level consultations. And guess what? The majority of the program leaders are women. This is the shift we need from extractive systems to regenerative ones, from an overemphasis on GDP to well-being, from power to power with. And Ipoh is not alone. Cities like Amsterdam, Brussels, Portland, Nanaimo are also applying the donut model to rethink governance for the 21st century. What unites all these efforts? Local wisdom, community leadership, and many women at the helm. As we look to COP30, let's be clear. Climate negotiations cannot remain detached from justice. We cannot carry the baggage of old economic models into a new climate era. That would be like trying to build a sanctuary with the same tools that built the fire. The leadership of women, especially Indigenous women, women of color, women from the global south, is not optional. It's essential because when disasters strike, women suffer differently and suffer first. But we also rise first. We rebuild, we reimagine, we regenerate. Let's remember, well-being economies do not mean utopia. They mean reality built differently. Economies where care is counted, where forests are valued as much as financial portfolios, where interdependence is not weakness but strength. And yes, the road ahead is hard. We are up against powerful lobbies, entrenched interests, and colonial legacies that refuse to die. But we are also living through a moment of extraordinary possibility. The world is listening. Youth are rising. Indigenous knowledge is being reclaimed. Science and spirituality are converging. And everywhere, women are refusing to be invisible. So let us be bold. Let us be unafraid to imagine and implement a world in which economics becomes a tool for life, not for loss. As poet Adrienne Rich wrote, the most important thing one woman can do for another is to expand her sense of actual possibilities. So here's our call to action. Let's expand the world's sense of what is possible. Let's scale up cities and communities that embrace regenerative economics like Kate's donut economics and include well-being metrics in our development plans. Let's center the margins and let's center the margins because that is where the new world is being born. And let us leave here knowing this. The blueprint for a just, joyful, and livable future is already in our hands. Now we must have the courage to build it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Jemilah, for those powerful comments. And we're really glad you could join us today. Thank you so much. I understand from my team that our colleague Memory is not on the line yet. We're still working technically with her. So I'm going to move to have Majo Cerda join us. Majo, are you there? You have the floor. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Ashley, and thank you everyone for um, uh, taking the time to hear us, because sometimes I think it's difficult to reach Indigenous bases communities, and especially women who can talk in spaces like this, for people to listen what we are doing. So I'm Majo Andrade Cerda from the Kichwa people of Serena. I live in the Amazon. I'm leading this organization called CONFENIAE. I'm in the background. That's the name. I'm representing 11 Indigenous peoples groups that live in the Amazon, and I'm leading the Department of Economics. So I would like to share a video quickly. I don't know if the technical team can help me with that. It's a short video. I would like to introduce what we are doing.
Las nacionalidades indígenas amazónicas ecuatorianas hemos vivido en nuestro territorio la selva por siglos. Cuidamos de los bosques, ríos, cascadas, tierra, aire, plantas y animales, y de las comunidades, beneficiando a toda la humanidad.
Por eso es importante que implementemos una gestión integral de los territorios, considerando nuestras culturas para asegurar una conservación que incluya a los jóvenes, mujeres y ancianos.
Que responda a nuestras formas tradicionales de vida y respete las decisiones autónomas de las organizaciones acorde a los derechos colectivos y de la naturaleza.
Las oportunidades económicas en la Amazonía deben ser en armonía con la naturaleza y la vida digna de las comunidades.
Organizadas y organizados, podemos defender nuestros derechos y territorios.
Yes, that was the video that show what we are trying to do in our department, the economics department, but we are also adding a plus in our work, because we don't want just economics as the sense the Western world view always economics, but we want to restructure that. We want to give dignity to our communities, especially for women and youth who really need this to keep having our ancestral knowledge till next generations, right? So in the economic department, we are not talking just about giving capital to entrepreneurs, but we want that entrepreneurs, indigenous economies initiatives can give dignity and come back to the sense of the community, right? So also what we want to do is to create a brand that is called Amazonia. It means we want to create this with love. Remember when in a letter you send a letter to someone you love, you say bye, but you say sending love or love, and we want to do that thing with Amazonia. We want to send the Amazonia to people, and to believe that the Amazon rainforest it's still alive. We just have the Amazon. We can take care of the Amazon till this year. Otherwise, if we don't keep working on saving the Amazon, we are not going to talk about more the Amazon in the future. So what we want to do, it's to create a platform where indigenous initiatives are all together to defend the forest, the rainforest, and the rivers mainly, the flying rivers that are integrated in our ecosystem. We want to preserve nature. We want to preserve everything. And the economics area, it's focusing on this because we believe that indigenous governance has to include economics, education, health, and other issues as an integrity to have an autonomy in our lands. So what we need to do is keep working, but with the perspective of indigenous peoples. In this world of talking about economics, we are thinking maybe sometimes and all the time, as I said, we are always thinking about capital, but we cannot capitalize our rivers, our forests. What we want to have, it's really good prices and fair trade for our knowledge, because we are not just selling a product, we are not just selling food, we are selling our knowledge, our ancestral knowledge. Because if now acai is very demanded in the US and in other countries, it's because indigenous peoples first eat that food. It's not just because we are in this territory that we know this, but it's for like ancestral knowledge that can help us to build all of this. And now just people is demanding. We cannot do this just because someone is demanding. It's because we need this integrity, this dignity to our territories. So I would like to also let you know that in this program, we are helping our indigenous entrepreneurs with an accelerator. And this accelerator is giving money to the businesses led by indigenous peoples. And this is like credit, loans with no interest. And this is all managed by the indigenous organization that I'm leading now. So the rest of the money, it's like just capital seed capital to invest in the own business. And we need to do that to create a sense of how we can do economies in indigenous territories, how we can do savings, but in a sense of how you retribute to indigenous communities, and mainly to have the very main role of indigenous women, who are the ones who are managing the economics, the money, the savings, and also the ancestral knowledge, and how we are integrating this to programs as education, health, and even serving basics as cleaning water. So I would like just to finish saying that we are in all of this together, and we need to support more indigenous-led initiatives. We need to support indigenous youth initiatives, and also women who are in the front lines of this work. I can tell everyone what else we are doing, so please reach us out in our social media and our website. I'll have also my email. But thank you so much for giving us this space and to hear us what we are doing back in our lands. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Majo. It's really great to see you. And Majo and I have known each other for over the years now, and I just love that you have come into this position and your leadership and all that you're doing. And it's really exciting. And one of the things that I really love that I learned when I was in Ecuador from indigenous peoples over, the last decade plus, is about the entire concept of buen vivir, or in some cases, what is called sumak kausai. And it's a very, very different view of economy. And Majo was just explaining like how that gets manifested and governed by indigenous peoples. And it's very exciting because it's a very different view of not seeing the growth of economies just based on material growth, but on our well-being, on a relationship with community, our relationship with the land, our relationship with each other, our relationship with creativity, and really turning the idea of economy into a much more holistic view about how we live with each other and the earth and reciprocity, and also what we value as something that is growth, which doesn't have to be material growth. And it's a very large concept, and something that I think is very exciting coming from a lot of our Indigenous communities in Latin America. And I just really wanted to uplift that. And thank you for the incredible work you're doing, Majo, to show us what does that look like and how we really need to listen to Indigenous, not only Indigenous science, but Indigenous economy. So thank you so much for your presentation. And with that, I would love to hand the floor to Dr. Maliha Khan. You have the floor. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Osprey, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this panel. I'm really, I know people performatively say they're really honored to be a part of this, but I really am. This is an incredible array, as you so pointed out. I'm going to lift us up a little bit from what Majo was talking about, which is incredibly important, or what people can do at an individual level, and talk a little bit about what do we see happening around us, as you pointed out right in the beginning, in this multi-crisis. And and I'm, as an optimist, see an opportunity in every crisis. So I want to sort of think about, direct us to think about that, think about where we can insert a reimagining of economies and a reimagining of the world order in which these economies rest, and a reassertion of the rights of individuals, women, Indigenous people, gender fluid people, all of them included, so that we are not constantly still battling the old systems. So for that, I want to talk a little bit about, the current capitalist system seems that it's been immutable, seems like it's been there forever, the extractive nature of it, the exploitative nature of it, and the fact that it benefits only a handful of individuals and not others. I believe Oxfam just came out with a report this week, which talked about how the trillions of dollars that the 1% have gained since 2015. So this is just in the last 10 years, the trillions and trillions of dollars that they have increased their wealth by. And this system doesn't always have to be thus. And I do think that the current attack on the multilateral system, on the rules-based order that's happening, but through a multitude of ways. One is through the reduction of ODA by donor governments. They are absolutely abdicating on their responsibilities that they have put forward. And these are self-appointed responsibilities post-colonialism, but that much of the global South and majority world's sort of social sector was reliant on those aid flows going forward. That is collapsing right now because donors have decided, northern governments have decided that they are going to abdicate those responsibilities, call it charity, and say that they're no longer going to do it, although we knew that when we did the post-colonial world order, the silent agreement was that these were really reparations for colonialism, and were owed to these countries, were not a form of charity. But over the last year and going into the next year, there's an estimation of almost 40 to $60 billion leaving the system. And that has been incredibly vital for social services in many countries that are debt strapped. The other ways that we're seeing a real reduction of these, of the world-based order is through the undermining of multilateralism, right? And you spoke about, the possibilities of convening around the UN General Assembly, around COP and other places. Those global spaces and the institutions that have upheld those global spaces and the global system that's worked to make those possible and make our, the little bit of progress that we've made on issues related to gender and climate have been coming through this system. So there's no wonder that the very same people who've been exploiting the capitalist system and gaining more and have been a part of the climate crisis are also undermining this rules-based international multilateral system. It's by design. And it's being done through a number of ways. I won't get into all the details of it, but I'm happy to talk about it later. But we know that there's an undermining of it. And where do we go when that rules-based order is no longer there and no longer serving us? In addition, of course, there is the climate crisis that each and every one of us is facing. the shocks and stresses we face are all similar. They don't differentiate between gender and class and socioeconomics and country. However, the implications of them and how we're able to face them and where our resilience lies is all to do with the incident of your birth, right? Where are you born? Which country do you reside in? How many systems do they have in place in order to be resilient? And we know that those who contribute the least to the climate crisis also pick up the heaviest burdens. And that is not just, and that needs to change. And that is also a crisis that is being ignored. And there's a reason why the multilateral system and the ways that we've been addressing the climate crisis really have been degendered, de-socioeconomic classed, and de-aged. There is no analysis of how age, class, gender, and other attributes affects your ability to face the climate crisis and to be able to survive shocks and stresses as they hit you. So on this, and I know I said I'm an optimist and there's possibility, and so far I haven't been sounding like that, but let me bring in the optimism. Wherever there's a crisis, wherever there's a shaking up of the international rules-based order, there's the opportunity to change it. What seemed immutable and unchangeable only a few years ago with the hegemony and the dominance of the US ODA-driven system that was dominated by northern governments, that is falling apart. National governments are recognizing and realizing that there needs to be a different system in place so that they can provide the essential services that is the responsibility of every state to their citizens. And that includes basic services around health, around clean water, around a clean environment, and all the rights that each citizen enjoys because of the mere fact that they are citizens of those countries. Nothing else should matter. And that includes, and there should be no discrimination based on that. So what is the opportunity? Dr. Mahmood has already quoted my favorite author on change by putting Arundhati Roy out there, that the new world is possible. So I'm going to quote my second favorite, and the only reason why he's my second favorite is because he's a dead white man. I'd much rather quote a living, brown woman. But Gramsci, way back in 1947, said, "Now is a time of monsters. The old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born." So we know that this is the moments of when there's terrible, as we were euphemistically calling them, difficult times and challenges. There's a full-on assault on all the things that have mattered to us. But where the opportunity lies is that the rules-based international order, which was really put in place to favor and reinforce the hegemony of northern colonial governments, can be changed. The majority world, the group of 77, whatever you want to call it, can now say, actually, that system no longer suits us. The debt-ridden system that we're burdened with national debts, so that, for instance, my country, Pakistan, pays $20 billion a year on debt servicing, and so therefore has no money left to be able to provide services to its own citizens, and heavily relies on ODA to be able to meet basic things like education, healthcare, clean drinking water and supplies, that needs to change. And that also the rules-based order needs to really be driven not by a handful of countries who can drive agendas, not call genocide a genocide, be able to apply rules to certain countries and not to other countries, and to essentially gaslight us in so many ways, that we can actually say that time has to change. We have to change it. And also, because not only am I an optimist, but I'm also a pragmatist, one of the offerings that I would like to make right now, Osprey, you mentioned the UN General Assembly and COP30. I'd also like to throw into that mix the Women Deliver 2026 conference, which will be held in April of 2026 as another global space where we can all convene, where we can put forward our collective demands of the world we want to see, the systems that we need to put into place that would serve all the communities, all the citizens of the world, particularly women and girls and gender diverse people, and with a focus on those who hold the original knowledge going forward, as a place where we can make those demands, push forward, and make the political commitments that are needed in order to achieve it. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Khan, for your important comments and also the wonderful work that you're doing. I think, and we'll come back, hopefully you can have some time for discussion at the end to come back around to, these critical issues around how we actually put into practice and have the political will and the political levers to create deep systemic change in our economic structure. I think it's one of the most important questions of our time, because in many ways, and perhaps you have had this experience as well, where we actually work in frontline communities who are working to practice a new economy, a well-being economy or degrowth economy, or the many different terminologies we have, which is basically an anti-capitalistic structure that really puts power and energy into the hands of community and care for nature. And the system that we're in, which, as you said, seems like it's completely unchangeable. And I think we're really talking about the space in between and how we get to the economy and the world that we know we want to see functioning and is healthy and does all of the work that you mentioned about care for citizens that government should be helping to perform, and the current structures that we have, and this endless economic growth system, this capitalist system that we're in, this imperialist system they're in, and how we continue to perpetuate catering to the wealthy elite, and how our systems are designed to do that. And we're in a huge power struggle over this right now, all over the world. And so I think this is a very vital conversation about how we actually get into where are the points of leverage and where are the points for political action, and how do we gain the power to do that. So it's a really vital dialogue that you bring forward, and thank you so much for joining us to put all of those pieces of information together for us. And with that, we're going to hear from Rauna from Finland. Let's go ahead and hand the floor to Rauna.
Oire päivi, dear Women's Earth and Climate Action Network and participants of the Global Women's Assembly for Climate Justice 2025. Uunammalea Jounajon Anne Kirsti Rauna tai Fierranjot Kirsti Rauna. My name is Rauna Kuokkanen, and I greet you from the Arctic Circle and the Sápmi territory, currently in Rovaniemi. I'm speaking from the territories of the Sápmi people, whose traditional territories span across 4 nation states: Norway, Sweden, Finland, and the Kola Peninsula in Russia. My short remarks are titled today, More Than Markets, Indigenous Economies as Climate Justice. And my core message is that indigenous economies are not only about survival, they are about relations, responsibility, and resurgence. They offer relational models of economic life rooted in care for land, water, kinship, and future generations, precisely what climate justice requires. Where I come from, economy isn't a line on a GDP report. It is the salmon run, the berry patch, and the stories and knowledge people have and share, as well as the way in which we raise children to know their relations, both with human and more than human beings, and their connection to the land. So what are indigenous economies? They are more than economic activities by indigenous peoples. They are more than human, relational, and land-based systems. Indigenous economies are rooted in kinship both with human and beyond human relations, and perhaps more importantly, responsibilities, not just transactions. This take place in very diverse forms. They are harvesting, gifting, ceremony, reciprocal trade, customary stewardship, and seasonal subsistence rounds. Indigenous economies embody climate resilient practices developed over millennia. These economies prioritize ecological balance, sustainability, and intergenerational care. The Sámi people traditionally recognize 8 distinct seasons that guide our cultural and subsistence practices, each marking subtle changes in the landscape, weather patterns, and animal behavior. However, climate change has disrupted this intricate seasonal knowledge as unpredictable shifts in temperatures, shorter winters, unpredictable spring and fall seasons, and altered migration patterns of animals have led to the collapse of these established natural rhythms and knowledge. An example from Sámi reindeer herding and the reindeer herding's role in land care is the semi-annual migration of reindeer herds between summer and winter pastures. This migration not only helps preserve biodiversity, but also minimizes environmental impact. At its core, this practice embodies respect for diverse landscapes as it involves returning to the same areas. You have to make sure that you leave them in a good condition so you can return again. So I want to emphasize that supporting indigenous economies means supporting also indigenous autonomy, sovereignty, self-determination, and land rights. Without these indigenous economies are not able, and they are also critical for climate action. There are major challenges facing indigenous peoples and indigenous economies. Colonial economies have displaced indigenous economies. Today, we face a new threat, the neoliberal so-called green economies, market-based green solutions that seek to address climate change, carbon offsets, and resource extraction in the name of renewables. And this is particularly challenging at the moment here in the Nordic countries and in Sápmi, the Sámi territory. Those perpetuate the harm that has already started more than 100 a century ago in the Sámi territory. I want to also at the same time call attention how indigenous women are often at the forefront and the front line of both harm and innovation as knowledge holders and community leaders. For example, indigenous women often are water protectors. And with growing investments in alternative energy generation, there has been so far insufficient attention to the environmental and social costs for water systems and communities. Many proposed hydropower projects are located on Sámi territories or in areas where altered water flows will disrupt downstream ecosystems, food systems, and living conditions. And this is also true to many other indigenous peoples. But there are also very hopeful moments. There are increasing number of land back campaigns, indigenous-led conservation areas, indigenous stewardship programs, guardian programs, and community-run renewable programs and projects. In Sápmi, the most well-known also in the international media is the FOIN case, where Southern Sámi youth and reindeer herders are seeking to claim the land from one of the largest wind industry initiatives in Europe. I couldn't emphasize enough the importance of indigenous self-determination as a climate solution. It is essential to climate justice because it returns authority to communities whose governance systems are designed to sustain ecological balance, protect biodiversity, and prioritize long-term collective well-being over short-term extraction. I want to invite everyone to see Indigenous economies not as relics, but as forward-looking, future-oriented systems of care based on relational thinking, being, and action. I want to close my remarks noting that climate justice isn't only about cutting emissions. It's about changing the relationship between people, land, and economies. Indigenous economies show us how, by taking care of each other, human and beyond the human, including the land herself. I want to invite the Assembly to center Indigenous-led economic models in climate policy, funding, and action. I conclude with this idea that the economy is the way we take care of each other. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Rauna from the Finland area. We just absolutely love your presentation and sharing with us Indigenous economic values and systems. It's so important for us to think about how we can view the economy in a very different way. And before we go to our next speaker, I wanted to bring Majo back into the conversation since we're talking about Indigenous economy. And just to ask you to weigh in on what Rauna said, and also if you could further elucidate ideas about buen vivir. I think it would be good for us to go a little bit deeper into that. And then I also have a question for Dr. Khan, but please go ahead if you would really help to open that conversation up a little bit more, Majo. That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things that I believe we should create more in Indigenous economies is that Indigenous economies is just one part of our governance for Indigenous people. So think about a table. It needs four stands to be like a table. If we don't have one, it's gonna be wrecked, right? So economy is one part of this, and we need to give independence to communities to govern their processes and their territories. I was just reflecting on what my other colleagues were saying here is that also economics are not just a part of this governance, but also are tackling climate change. How? Well, we are introducing our Indigenous knowledge into these initiatives, and we are having independence in our own processes, and then we are tackling some extractive industries. For example, in our territories, we are being threatened by mining and oil exploitation, right? So if we give alternatives to communities, they could not sell their lands to the miners or to the oil companies. So we keep the territories, the lands for ourselves. And in the program that we are having at CONFENIAE, we have like a commitment with the Indigenous businesses that they have to give some of the percentage of their financing to invest again in the preservation of forests for them, even if it's not deforestation or monitoring the rainforest, but also to reforest some forests that were lost because other activities, other economic activities. So I think it's really important to know that this process cannot just be apart from what the public investment is doing, or it's apart from the private investment. Everything is interconnected. So if we find a way to put all together the private and the public sector to invest more in indigenous peoples, not just like a part of philanthropy, but also as a part of doing these businesses in a good way with indigenous peoples and having, of course, their free, prior, and informed consent. So all of this process, we had to build in a good way that the organization, the community, and even the business can understand. Otherwise, it's going to affect our structure of how we govern our territories as indigenous organizations or communities. So what is the most important part is that we all build this together. I didn't do this alone as the leader of CONFENIAE, but it's about to give the chance to everyone to speak up, and we can build this together. And I'm checking the boxes, and I was going to compliment what my sister Sápmi said. It's really important also to create this kind of independence in economies, because we are the protectors of water. And I'm seeing in real life that when miners come to our land, to a territory, they are destroying our vital source of life, that it's water. So when we are trying to preserve just the water, we need to give alternatives, because in my territory, the miner said, but you don't have money to buy food. But I said, I have enough water to be alive. So maybe that's the thing that we need to do this, thinking first in the community and then how we can protect the environment as well, because we are all in this together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Majo. So important. And also, I think it really speaks to what many people who are working towards having a new economy are discussing. An indigenous, and including indigenous economy, is also localizing our economy so that our economies get closer to the ground with community, with food security, with water protection, with care for the forest, that we get our economies to be much more localized and integrated into our local communities and food and water systems. So thank you for your comments. And I'd like to turn to Dr. Kuokkanen. And, as you were discussing more about, multilateral processes and the way that our governance structures are affecting our economy. And from your perspective, what do you see are the most, the largest opportunities, let's say, for interventions to move us off of this economy that is not working, that is, the economy that we're functioning in, this very top-down, extractive, servicing the wealthy, environmentally very disastrous, climate unfriendly economy. We could put a lot of other adjectives there, but what do you see are some of the biggest openings we have for interventions and change? It would be great to hear from you from your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And I'll couch my answers in with a caveat that I'm not an international economist, right? So I'm not bringing it from that perspective. But I do think that much of the current economic system is symbiotic with the international rules-based order that the northern governments put in place post-colonialism, as a way of still being able to control and extract from those countries that they wanted to have those relationships with as they gained independence, and they didn't want to lose that. I think that, allowing national governments to exert their own autonomy and making sure that we're creating a system in which civil society, which includes indigenous communities, but others too, can hold their own governments to account in order for them to provide what is the responsibilities of each government to provide, and that these governments are then able to negotiate better and more favorable conditions for themselves. Because right now, the conditions that each of these governments are put under, the structures of debt, the unfavorable trade agreements, the extractive nature of multinational corporations, and the fact that they don't pay taxes, etc., are all part of this system. So if we're able to lift up national governments, allow civil society to, and each citizen to hold those governments accountable, so that slowly over time, they have to respond to the needs of their own citizens. And that pressure can then be exerted by Indigenous groups, by women-led institutions and organizations, and by the feminist movement. So I think it's really important that we look at how these multilateral systems will be navigated and negotiated, how, for instance, the climate debates are going to be structured going forward, so that we don't have veto power of certain governments. We don't have the vast majority of people who are attending COP being supported by or actually being, oil and gas lobbyists, which is currently, the oil and gas lobbyists far outnumber any of the civil society people who are attending all of those sort of forums. So I think that, if we don't put out the vision of what the vast majority of the world would like the system to be and see, where we don't talk about things like debt cancellation so that governments can invest in their own economies that allow citizens to thrive rather than just to survive particularly in the face of the climate crisis, then we're really, really missing a very big opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I think, I just want to share with our audience, and I'm sure people are aware in their own work, this is incredibly hard work. So just to give an example, sort of queuing off of Dr. Khan's comments, as an example, when we were all in Azerbaijan for COP29 at the end of last year, it was called the Finance COP, and it was supposed to be a negotiation around really figuring out how wealthy countries, the global north particularly, is going to help finance what are we going to do to get off of fossil fuels and transition to clean energy, what's going to happen around loss and damage, and all these different components that are being negotiated regarding the Paris Climate Agreement that have to do with the finance component. And it was, I don't know any other word, it was a disaster. People walked away from COP29 really from civil society perspective, very empty-handed. And it really has to do with the fact that, one, there wasn't enough finance put on the table by wealthy countries by a vast, vast margin. The money is there. We've been talking over the last few days about how we can look at our governments, and I'm here in the United States and watching literally billions and billions going to the military, but where are the finances to care for communities, care for the earth, care for basic well-being? So the funds are there, but they're not being allocated to the things that we need or that the earth needs. And so the finances that were put on the table were minuscule compared to what the demands are. And then the other part is talking about the quality of the finances themselves, that they're not put forward in terms of loans, but in terms of actual grants. And so that we see the funds moving from those who have the wealth and have the funds to those who need them in a form that doesn't create more debt, which creates a vicious cycle, as you were getting at a little bit, Dr. Khan. And so I think this is a really critical component of not only the climate negotiations, but how the world is governing finance and wealth overall, which is not heading in the right direction. So there was a lot of pushback by civil society in Azerbaijan, a lot of frustration from governments that are depending on these funds for this transition into a new regenerative economy, renewable energy economy. What's going to happen with the fact of adapting to climate disasters and all of these different components. And I think the thing that's really tragic and sad is how slow governments are moving in relationship to the crises that are unfolding, not just but climate, environment, social injustices. And it's not really meeting the needs of the people. And so I just wanted to emphasize that I think that we're on course with what our demands are and our analysis about what could happen, from feminist economics to the degrowth movement to beyond growth movements to Bhutan gross national happiness to indigenous economies. I mean, I think a lot of information's out there by economic experts and people practicing reciprocal relationships with the land and each other in different economies. But the powers that be and the institutions that are in place are formidable. And so I think it is a time where civil society has to get louder and stronger in our interventions and demands around, the fact that we have to address our governments in how they're regulating the techno billionaires, for example, and the fact of how we're going to actually move us into a well-being economy, which is what's really needed. And so I think this is where the challenge really exists, is knowing the kind of economy we need and how do we actually get our governments and those in power to move along with a very different view of economic structures. And I see that your hand's up, Dr. Khan. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and please call me Maliha. I don't know who you're referring to. I keep saying Dr. Khan. But one of the other things I wanted to add to you, completely, agree with everything you're saying. But I also want to add the whole issue of taxation, right? So there is debt. There is the need for those that have, those governments that have exploited others through colonialism and other factors, to be able to, to not give loans and etc. and those be grants, because that's really reparations, and we should talk about that. If nothing else, we should talk about debt restructuring and debt cancellation. But we should also talk about taxation. I quoted Oxfam's report, which didn't note the numbers down, can't remember exactly where they were, but I did look up another one that just in 2024, the wealthiest 1% have increased, just in that year, increased their wealth by $2 trillion, right? So the amount, and if we continue to go in this direction, there will be they're projected to be 3 or 4 individuals who will be trillionaires. And that's a sum that is just very, very difficult for us to fathom. Part of the issue that we are facing right now is that so many of these individuals try to get around public censure and outcry against their unbelievable accumulation of wealth by reverting to philanthropy, right? But that means that the issues that they care about are those that get funded. And yes, there are many of them which we applaud, that they are, yes, they're giving away billions of their dollars. And, Gates has just said he's going to give away his entire wealth over the next 10 years. The question, though, should be, why in the world are these people allowed to accumulate this level of wealth? And why should the ways, with the absence of overseas development aid, and I know there was a question of when I said ODA, what do I mean? I'm talking about, countries like the US and the UK, Canada, Germany, etc., giving grants and giving loans to those countries, least developed and middle income developing countries, that then fund so much of the work that their citizens are reliant on, that we can't turn to philanthropy, but then also, why should we have to turn to philanthropy? Right? That is the key thing. That it should be the rights of every individual as citizens of their own country, for their governments to be able to meet their basic needs in education, in water supply, in clean environment, in healthcare, and not be reliant on a handful of billionaires and trillionaires and their philanthropy, or by the largesse, and I say this in quote unquote, largesse of donor governments. It should be the compact between the citizen and the state. And then these governments should really negotiate the international rules-based order, not by the dominance of a handful of countries, but by the preponderance of the majority of the countries as to what the world and the rules that we abide by look like. And I think that is really, really important, that we should be pushing for at this moment in time.
Thank you so much, Maliha. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's really critical that we have that level of intervention and what we need to be pushing for. And I wanted to see if Majo, if you wanted to jump into the conversation to add anything before we close out. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really important what Dr. Maliha said, because in terms of money, the wealthiest people are addressing all the economies around the world. And that's why we are not having these economic resources back in our territories. But at the same time, we are having a lot of richness in the sense of our forests, right? Our forests, our rivers. And I think that's the important part also, to change what we are seeing as valued or not. Who determines what is valued? The ones who have money. But at the same time, we should keep strengthening our own ways on recognizing the power that we have, right? Without the forests that are in indigenous territories, we cannot talk about the future in the world, because humanity depends on the forest and the territories of indigenous peoples. I'm not saying that we should commodify everything, like putting a price on carbon that our forests are giving to the world, right? So what I'm saying is that we have to think about the global commons. What is really a commonality in the world is that we are sharing this struggle against climate change, right? So we should revert what happened in the sense of doing these economies. Capital make that climate change, it's happening now, right? But if we turn the table and put in the position of indigenous peoples and creating this sense on what we are doing as indigenous peoples, mainly women and youth, we can retrieve this sense and create our own platforms like we are doing right now in the Amazon. There's a lot of talking about hundreds of millions giving in pledge around climate change conferences and also biodiversity conference at the UN. But at the same time, just maybe less than 2% of that money has reached indigenous communities, right? So that's why we are creating these new initiatives that generate these dynamics of economics in our own communities, right? To keep surviving, to keep the resistance against the system. So I think the important part here is recognizing who is leading the economic narrative and how we can change that, as we are doing in climate change negotiation, in human rights, about indigenous people's collective rights. We have to check how we can change the narrative there.
Very good point, Majo, and that's one of our big challenges. And I think we need to see it sort of all the different components in an ecosystem of how we change the narrative, how we push back in these multilateral spaces, and also at the same time keep demonstrating on the ground the new economy. So it's a very holistic approach to everything from the research to these new narratives, doing media work, and pushing back as civil society. It's a really comprehensive approach about, very, very huge job, which is transforming our economy. I do see one of our presenters has made it onto the Zoom room with us, and we're so glad to have her here. Sandrine Dixson-Declève, we introduced you earlier, but we're so glad you're here. Please take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Osprey, and I am so sorry that I could not come sooner. I'm actually here at London Climate Action Week, and I was chairing a session that went over, and I'm actually here in Guildhall in these incredible halls where we've talked about how important not only gender and climate is, but also how we need to talk about a new economy. So thank you, Majo, for your point, because this is the crucial point, and that's the reason why we've all been brought together by Osprey today, right? How do we actually think about that new economy? And not only how do we think about it, but how do we actually make it real? We published, so as a representative now of the Club of Rome, having been co-president of the Club of Rome, very much looking at new economic models and thinking through not only Western models, but clearly models that are important for the Global South. A shift towards what we are calling system dynamics and thinking through well-being, which is integrated very clearly across our economic indicators. So getting absolutely structural in terms of how we look beyond GDP, because we know that it's our extractive economy that has driven us to now the UNDP reporting for the first time that we are no longer progressing as a human species from an economic perspective. And I think this is fundamental. Going beyond GDP, because we also know, and even though the Club of Rome and so many of our allies that we've been working with who have tried to very much speak about new economic models, such as the donut model or the well-being economy governance model, because we have 5 core governments across the globe that are actually putting in place indicators that go beyond GDP, and they are more resilient to shocks and stresses. So these are proof points. But the reason why beyond GDP now is becoming so important, and governments hopefully will start to listen, even though we know how difficult it is because we know that the cost of inaction on climate change, so now at 1.5, we will lose annual GDP of about 3%. And we also know that the cost of inaction at 3 degrees will be upwards of 10 to 17%. So what we're really saying here now to governments is this is a no-brainer. I mean, if you didn't listen to Indigenous people before, if you didn't listen to the importance of the care economy and women in the economy, if you didn't listen because you were so caught up in what I'm now calling tech bro feudalism, then ladies and gentlemen, and the gentlemen are not hopefully, or I don't know if they are on this call, the fact of the matter is this is the moment of the new economy. This is the moment of moving beyond GDP. It is the only way we are actually going to prepare and protect our economy to future shocks and stresses. The good news is we have at the UN level a high-level panel that's now looking at moving beyond GDP. And the good news is also that we have the European Commission and other countries, sorry, I got something in my throat, who are also looking at new indicators. So we are now working structurally with economists and scientists to make sure that we have a cluster of indicators to work together and really put that forward to more governments across the globe. What we've been doing also at Earth for All, and Osprey, I'll close here, is creating a movement of variety of people, governments, and civil society actors, but also finance ministers who are starting to understand, even working with the IMF, the World Bank, the ECB, the EIB here in Europe, that actually this is really the moment of shifting towards a buffering of GDP with new indicators that enable us to move to beyond GDP. And I'd say the last point is the excitement is the Brazilian government and the way in which the Brazilian government has really picked this up. The fact that Lula has already put into the G20 conversation the need to look at other types of economic development and economic models. The fact that he already hosted a social summit and that we are now thinking of integrating into the COP language for COP30 and working with the Brazilian government, so a real steer towards moving beyond GDP and putting in place new indicators. So this is an exciting moment. We're having these conversations in a variety of different fora, even if we know that right now it is so difficult because of what's happening in the United States. And as I said, this tech bro feudalism that is going totally counter to what a well-being economy stands for. Diversity, love, support, equity, a reduction in poverty, enabling people to have better lives and livelihoods. what we're seeing is that there is a counter movement that is really pushing this forward. And I just want to thank Osprey and the team for all your incredible work in trying to bring us all together to have these conversations. And I am so apologetic for not coming sooner.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandrine. No apologies. You're doing your work, and we're so glad you're on the ground at London Climate Week to do your important work. So it's totally understood, been there, understand the situation, but I really appreciate your comments and especially your enthusiasm and giving us a really good glimpse of hope around this change around GDP, because we were talking about it before you were online, just how critical it is that we move to a different economy. There's just no way forward without that. And we were talking about what levers do we have to push that agenda forward. So it's really exciting to hear work. Because of that, let's fire one question to Sandrine before you go, if you don't mind, and then we'll close this session. How do we square the fact of, even with countries moving towards a new GDP, let's say, how do we deal with these techno bros? How do we deal with the fact that so much of the economy is based on extractivism? Any comments on that as your final comment would be great, and then we'll close the session. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a lot about tech bro feudalism today. I'm just now in a session around how we can enhance collaboration by bringing in some, for example, of the good AI companies that are really wanting to hack the way in which the bad AI companies are moving in the wrong direction, because we have to understand that our movement towards decarbonization has now been fundamentally interrupted by what I call the 5 M's, right? The 5 M's stand for monarchy, money, minerals, molecules, and military. And if you look at those 5 M's, you can pretty much see them play out in terms of the geopolitics today. What's important here is that the progress that we were making has been a bit halted by those 5 M's. And so the only way that we can regain control is that we have to be a hell of a lot more strategic. And so there are a variety of different pathways. One is we have to hack humanity and love into everything we do. And we do. We definitely need to bring in the feminist value system that absolutely needs to be hacked everywhere. But the other is that we need to kick these guys where it hurts. And so that needs to come in a variety of different ways. One is through holding governments and also holding companies accountable for their lack of moral value. And we can do that either through the way in which citizens are now engaging. We are talking about citizen assemblies. We're talking about democratized processes, but that sometimes takes time. I talk about Cambridge Analytica for good. Basically, I think we need to hack the whole system. We have to hack social media. We need to start to figure out through bots, through TikTok, through influencers, through different communication methods, how we can actually bring in, shift the thinking around this tech bro, macho one-upmanship that is encroaching into every single part of society, the manipulation, the hate, the fear mongering, etc. We also need to figure out where the financial flows are going. And that's incredibly important. We know that actually the entire populistic movement here has been fueled by the United States right-wing and Republican movements, but predominantly the right-wing parts of the Republican movement. And that we need to halt, or we need to counter by financing the good stuff, by financing counterculture to that particular type of culture. So there are a variety of hacks that have to happen. And then we have to go through the normal pathways, continue discussions in terms of international diplomacy and the discussions at the international level, continue discussions in terms of new indicators, continue discussions at the local level, working with good mayors that really want to move this forward, and at the level of the state and at the national level. So there are a variety of mycelia and different types of actions that need to happen at the same time. And part of the conversation we're having here, Osprey, is how do we bring all of this together? We're part of a climate collaborative here. I'd love to speak to you further about this and seeing how we can bring you and others into this broader collaboration and this mycelia effect network of networks where we start to hack the hell out of the tech bros.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Sandra. And I accept the invitation. Look forward to speaking with you. Thank you for your work at London Climate Week. And we've put, as I said, all of your links into the chat. We're going to go ahead and close the session. I really want to thank all of the presenters who have been on this really powerful panel around well-being economies and all of your analysis and different viewpoints. It's really exciting to have this discussion. It's a challenging discussion, but it's a discussion we have to have. So thank you all for your work, and we really appreciate the time you've taken with us. And we're going to move to our next panel at this stage. Thank you. Thank you.